All right. So PowerPoint 7 today, day 7, we are looking at two populations today. We are looking at cancer remission clients or clients who are dealing with some type of chronic lung disease. Both of those things are going to act pretty similar. Chronic lung disease, we're going to be talking about things like bronchitis or chronic pneumonia even. That one will be a pretty rare case because most of the time, like chronic pneumonia is pretty debilitating. A lot of times people will be in a hospital for something like that. But any like chronic lung disease that is affecting like an individual's ability to like bring in bulk flow of air, that's another condition we're going to be looking at. And there's a lot of similarities in terms of how you treat these two, different populations because the drugs that fight cancer often kill off a lot of the enzymes and aerobic processes that make it easier to process oxygen. And so it actually feels like shortness of breath is one of the biggest things that we're going to have to deal with, and lack of endurance. So let's take a look here. So cancer, by the way, just as a definition, right? We're going to define it as any of the various types of malignant neoplasms that invade surrounding tissues and metastasize to several sites. So that's kind of a wordy definition, but one of the best ways that I like to describe it is it's a group of non-functional and aggressive cells that keep a tissue from working, right? So like if we remember that like all of our tissues inside the body are, groups of cells all like bound together, working to like function as like a single unit, right? If you were to, let's say, replace some of those cells or cover some of those cells with some other type of like, we could call it tissue, that is really just grouping up over, and it's non-functional, right? Like it can't do what the other tissues are really designed to do. Well, then you just have less tissue that's functioning, and it's difficult for your body to maintain homeostasis. And that's why, this is such a dangerous disease. This is the second leading cause of death in the US. We definitely know, a lot of people do deal with this very, very, very commonly, about more than 1.5 million deaths annually. In terms of probability, there's about a 44% probability for men and about a 38% probability for women to develop some type of cancer at some point throughout their lifespan. And those chances only go up as we get older, as we progress forward through I guess human history. Like there's a lot more without going into all of the sort of hearsay on stuff, but we are seeing like more exposure to plastics in the oceans. We're seeing more artificial things inside of our foods. The plant's heating up lately. There's more UV rays blasting all of us every single day. Like this is definitely like a condition that is aggressive and growing, so it's important for us to know, sort of how to combat these things and how to deal with them, because it's the likelihood of you having a client who's dealing with this disease. Oh no, disease. Is pretty high. So just before we move forward, just talking a little bit about like, sort of what causes cancer. Obviously, there's a lot of different causes of cancers, and there's a lot of different types of cancers. This is one of the reasons why, this disease is so hard to cure. And you'll hear, what's funny is we have cured cancer several times, at least specific like strains, different versions. And we've done it through various very interesting means. One of the most interesting ways that they've ever combated cancer, I think this was out of Africa, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was. They did a very, very wild study where they had a cancer patient and they infected them with basically almost like a vaccine version of the HIV virus. And what HIV does is basically it attacks like your T cells, right? Like it keeps them from being able to like, develop like immunity to things. And so like it ended up attacking, like it was taught or trained to attack specific like cancer cells. And it was really interesting. It cured this person. And that was like an interesting thing. So there have been plenty of times in human history where we've sort of taken care of this disease, but the problem is there are so many different versions of it, because it affects different tissues in very different ways, that it's just not something that is easily curable. That's why there's ongoing research on this. It's a very, very complicated thing. Now, there are a lot of various causes out there, and we talk more about this in our nutrition classes than we do sort of in this class. I don't usually spend too much time. This class is really much more about how to work with clients who have these conditions, more so than how to understand like what the disease, or how you catch the disease, or things like that. How to prevent. I mean, obviously, we know how do you prevent diabetes. We know sugar intake is huge, and a healthy body weight. How do you prevent hypertension? Also a healthy body weight, but also like learning how to reduce stress, learning how to reduce sodium intake, things like that. So obviously, those are things that we can talk about. But cancer is kind of an interesting one because like it's a lot of different types of chemicals that have various effects on the cells of our body, right? So a lot of times what happens is you have an oxidated molecule, right? And when I say chemicals, by the way, don't think that I am anti-chemical, because I'm actually very pro-chemical. I think everyone is actually. I mean, water is technically a chemical. It's two hydrogens and an oxygen. Like that's the definition of what a chemical is. But obviously that's a very naturally occurring and incredibly important and healthy, the most important chemical that we have. But what we look at, if we look at like what an oxidative molecule is, right, we'll see what is called a free radical. And what a free radical is, if you remember anything from sort of high school chemistry, if you take a look at okay, that's actually looking at an antioxidant. That's not quite what I want to look at just yet. Free radical and oxidative stress. Let's see if that works for what I'm looking for. Yeah, that's close to. Yeah, that'll work. All right, this is a little cartoony for my taste, but it gets the job done, and I'm really not sure. Oh, actually, there we go. Much better. Here's a not cartoony picture. All right. So what a free radical is it's basically a chemical that has some type of an unpaired electron. So your electrons like to live in these what we call shells, and they like to live in a specific like number depending on which shell it is, right? So like this shell likes to have 2, this shell likes to have 6 or 8. Oh God, I don't remember my shell levels. Chemistry, electron levels. Oh no, 8. Oh, it's 2 plus 6. That's right. So it's 2, 6, and then 10 more. So that's 16 in the next one. Anyway, it goes up per energy level until eventually you get to the really wide energy levels, and they're holding massive amounts of electrons. So so like this right here, let's see, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's 7 electrons here. If this was a normal molecule like that, if you look at the periodic table, I gotta make sure I don't get too deep in the weeds here because I actually do like talking about this stuff. If you look at like chemical symbol 7, what is that? Nitrogen. Okay, so you've got chemical symbol 7. So this should be a molecule of nitrogen, but that's not what this is. This is a molecule of oxygen. Oxygen should have 8 electrons, okay? But what happens is you actually experience the reason we call it oxidative stress is because one of the electrons from here got stripped off of this molecule of oxygen. Now it's not going to become nitrogen, right? Nitrogen would have been happy to have 7 electrons. That would have been great, but oxygen is not happy. Oxygen is now missing an electron, and so it can't function the way it's supposed to. So what it's going to do is it's going to steal an electron from somewhere else, somewhere in the environment, right? So if we have a free radical, which is like a chemical that is also missing electrons, right? Let's say that is like a piece of plastic, for instance, right? So a piece of plastic is going to have, a lot of different like atoms in it and a lot of different things. And, some of those are going to become oxidated. And when that happens, that is going to strip an electron away. So now we've got this unhappy oxygen molecule that doesn't have an electron the way it's supposed to in its outermost shell. And so what it's going to do is going to be like, well, all right, that free radical stole an electron from me. I'm going to steal an electron from somewhere else, right? And if this is going on inside of your body, where's it going to steal that electron from? You and me, right? Like it's going to steal that electron from, one of the atoms that make up our tissues. So if that happens, your cells are going to become damaged, right? So your cells are going to be missing electrons. You can see here, right? Like this is the little cartoony version. You can see here's a free radical here, and he's coming along and he's stealing an electron until eventually, like this is a very unstable molecule, and that molecule, those atoms can no longer like bind together the way that they're supposed to, because electrons are how atoms bind and become, chemicals and molecules and stuff. They're not gonna be able to do that, right? So now you've got cells that, are non-functioning, right? And that's not great, but it's also not that bad yet. But then if that starts to happen, let's say in the parts of your cell that make up your DNA, right? So remember, if we look at like oxidative stress DNA. If we look at like how your DNA works, right? Remember, you've got your perfect. Exactly what I'm looking for here. You have got, your nucleus, right? Your nucleus is the sort of the brain of your cells, and it's got all your DNA, and that DNA is designed to tell your cell how to grow and what it's supposed to be and what it's supposed to do, right? And then you've got like the endoplasmic reticulum, where all of like the stuff from that DNA is assembled, and that's how it's making the stuff, and then there's mitochondria for producing energy and stuff. So all of these organelles in here, all of those are made up of atoms, just like the entire cell is made up of atoms, right? And you can damage any part of it. If it happens in the DNA, the blueprint is basically altered and ruined. And so you start to get a growth of cells that are non-functioning, right? Your cell's like, okay, well, I'm supposed to make a new cell, right? That's what I do. I'm a cell. I grow. I grow and I duplicate, over and over and over again. And so it does that, but then it does it in a way that causes it to grow that's not brand you, and so now you've got a non-functioning cell, and then that cell duplicates, and you have 2 non-functioning cells, and then that duplicates. So eventually you have a mass of cells, and that's sort of what we consider to be like a tumor, right? And if it's really aggressive and it's taking over tissues, that can be like a malignant tumor, or maybe not. Maybe it's not so aggressive, and maybe it's just something that can, immediately be removed and sort of taken care of. But this is one of the reasons why we need to avoid free radicals in our lives. Now, how do you get free radicals? Like, how do you, how do we get these things in our life? Well, again, you got to remember that, like I said, like plastics are a version of this. Is where we're seeing more plastics in our oceans. Is why recycling is so important. And honestly, trying to use as little plastic as possible is so important. Or at least like BPA-free types of plastics and things like that. These are things that are chemicals, right? And so they they're made up of atoms, but they're atoms that our cells can't use. They're atoms that are not, brand human, and so if they have an unpaired electron on them, they're going to oxidatively damage the surrounding tissues. They're going to react and combine with the molecules that they have access to, the atoms that they have access to. And so that can strip those electrons away from our body's tissues, and then our body's tissues can't function the way they're supposed to. Artificial sweeteners, that's the same thing. This is the reason why artificial sweeteners have been linked to different types of cancers, like why we try to avoid things like sucralose or not maltodextrin. Maltodextrin is fine. Oh my God, what are all my artificial sweetener types? Stevia, not stevia. Stevia is fine. What am I doing? Equal, sweet, and low, Splenda. Those are the big three, which are saccharin, asulfame, potassium. That's right. Aspartame. Why did I forget that one? And then sucralose. Sucralose is like the big popular one nowadays. For the record, stevia is fine. I mentioned that I should have left that alone. Stevia is actually totally fine. It's from a plant. It's chemically very similar. It works the same way an artificial sweetener does. Like the way sweet and low are equal, the way that all of these artificial sweeteners work is chemically, they just look really similar to sugar. They look really, 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 really similar to glucose. And so like when they get onto your taste buds, they trigger your nervous system to go, oh, that's sweet, even though it's not actually sweet. But your brain thinks it is, and that's why like sometimes like it's so much more intense when you use like an artificial sweetener. You're like, whew, that's really sweet, right? That's one of the ways you can tell it's artificial sometimes. But stevia is actually fine. Stevia is a plant-based, natural thing that's really similar there. So that's this is something we get in, or even just like exposure to the sun. That's another way that we can sort of modify our cells. You got to remember that like the sun's rays, although that is incredibly important for us to get, if we have overexposure to the sun, if you've ever had like a really bad sunburn, what that is that's UV damage, where the radiation from the sun has actually damaged your skin cells. It's actually modified their DNA. And your skin cells know it. They know that they've been compromised. They're actually programmed to know that like, once that DNA has become compromised, they are going to harm the overall body. So what they do is they self-destruct. And that's why when you get a sunburn, you turn bright red and then eventually like start peeling and flaking. That is your skin cells basically blowing themselves up to prevent them from sort of zombifying any of your other tissues nearby. They call that process apoptosis, by the way. It's a cell going through sort of self-destruction. So, it's a pretty heroic thing for our skin cells to do. I always think, I'm like, it's the most heroic story. Like, if that was in Osmosis Jones, that would be a real tragedy. If anybody remembers that movie, I loved that movie when I was a kid. I love that movie as an adult. What am I saying? So anyway, that's sort of how free radicals work inside the body. Now, that was all really bad, right? That's a lot of like bummer information. And now it's like, oh my God, how am I going to avoid these things? And the reality is you're not. I mean, these things they're in our water a lot of times. So how the heck can you protect yourself against stuff like this? Well, what's great about this is, remember, all a free radical is it's just looking to get its outer electron shell filled. So if you give it what it wants, it'll leave everything alone, right? So how the heck can you bombard yourself with extra electrons to kind of give away, right? Without like, compromising any of your cells' tissues. How do you get some extra electrons inside of your body that you can just donate, to these evil free radicals and get them to stabilize? Well, you can do that through specific vitamins, particularly vitamin C is going to be a really big one. Let's see here, antioxidants. But that is what we call an antioxidant. So vitamin C is really, really big. Vitamin E, vitamin K are also really big. Vitamin A is another one. So, those are all really, really, really helpful because they are basically like what these vitamins are is they've got extra electrons, right? And so when you look at how a free radical is acting versus an antioxidant, look at how many extra electrons these antioxidants have, right? So what they're willing to do is they're going to donate that electron away to this unpaired electron on this free radical, and it's going to be nice and happy. And so it's not going to steal electrons from you. It's going to get it from these vitamins that your body is already using anyways, and eventually just, runs out of and breaks down into individual pieces. So that's great, right? And then we also see it in phytochemicals, which are also in vegetables. Phytochemicals are all the things in this picture that are giving everything so much color, right? What is our phytochemical list? Looking for all the names that I can pronounce, not the actual chemical names, please. There we go. So you've got beta carotene is a really big one. That's the one that you're going to find in carotenoids. That's the phytochemical that gives carrots their orange color and sweet potatoes their orange color. And turmeric, or we see like lycopene, right? That's the phytochemical that's going to be found inside of tomatoes. You can actually get a lot of lycopene in tomato sauce, like when you get like pasta sauce that's actually fighting cancer, You've got saponins, which are found in like certain types of beans, usually like the really dark ones. Beans on this picture. Yeah, you can see like kidney beans here. That's a really big one. You can see like curcumin, which is also found in like turmerics and mustards, found in like yellows and stuff. You'll see flavonoids, which are found in like reddish colors, like reddish and purples, cranberries, apples, things like that. So all of the things that are giving fruits and vegetables color are protecting us against these free radicals. They have, they're these phytochemicals with all these extra electrons on them that they're willing to donate away to stabilize these free radicals and keep those free radicals from stealing an electron from our body's tissues. So how the heck do you avoid something like cancer? Well, you eat a balanced diet, eat a colorful diet, try to get as much color in your meals as possible. This is actually one of the reasons why you'll sometimes see doctors will recommend cancer patients go on like a juicing diet. And I'm not exactly like a big juicing fan, but that makes a lot of sense to me, Now I don't prefer juicing over smoothies. I think smoothies are better because it keeps everything, just sort of mashes everything up and you still have like all the fiber and all the other good stuff. But it can be more difficult to drink because it's more filling. So juices are really handy. And no, they don't have all the fiber, and then they don't have like the meat of the veggie and stuff, but like it has basically a big, massive concentration of all of those phytochemicals. So, positive stuff. So any questions on that? Just I just wanted to kind of address that one before we move on, because we don't get a chance to talk about this again until nutrition comes up, and that's like another probably like 18 weeks away. Any questions on how that works? Free radicals, antioxidants, vitamins, minerals? Questions, comments, concerns?
You're good.
Fair enough. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the effects that happen here, right? So if we are working with a cancer patient, right? Some of the biggest considerations that we're going to need to make is that excessive fatigue is really going to run your session. Your client's fatigue level is basically what is going to determine how capable they are that day, that session, right? Excessive fatigue is very, very common. It may result in like diminished overall activity, which is, going to reduce calorie burn and things like that. So, if you have a client who happens to have like specific like goals when it comes like nutritionally. A lot of times like cancer patients are trying to maintain muscle mass. This is something to be aware of like when we're trying to like balance out calories and stuff. Weakness is very, very, very common. Fatigue, right? Like I said, a decrease in lean muscle mass is something that often occurs. Like muscle wasting is a very common side effect of a lot of like the radiations and chemotherapies and things like that. And we do see decreased immune function as well. It's much more likely that your cancer patient will catch a cold or catch even get an infection and things like that. So because what these chemicals are doing is they're basically trying to create that apoptosis, trying to create that cell death that we're talking about, but hopefully in these cancer cells. But I mean, these chemicals are intense. They're really just going to kind of nuke everything in the area. It's like using weed killer in your yard. It kind of kills your grass sometimes. So that is definitely going to damage a lot of the things inside the body. So, we some of the positive effects, the sort of silver lining here, the good news, right, is that exercise has a really positive effect on our clients, right? So depending on the severity, we are going to see some limitations here, but we will see improvements in specific areas. Sometimes it'll be the retention of lean muscle mass, which is hugely important because our muscles allow us to function properly. So if you can keep your client's muscle mass on them throughout like their treatment, that's going to have really positive effects, on their overall quality of life. It can also improve their aerobic and their anaerobic fitness. One of the things that is also sort of a bummer about like cancer treatment is that it does destroy a lot of the oxidative enzymes that allow you to aerobically produce energy. So the mitochondria inside of your cells, they rely on a lot of these like enzymes in order to function properly. And if you don't have those enzymes because this drug is sort of destroying them, that's going to have really negative effects, right? And then anaerobically as well, right? We even just again with like the decrease in cellular volume comes a decrease in cytoplasm, which is going to reduce glycolysis. So both of those things are going to have negative effects that are going to be negatively affected by this cancer treatment. But again, by doing regular aerobic exercise and regular anaerobic exercise, you can have a really, really positive effect for your clients. It can also improve mood and self-esteem. I mean, obviously, this is an incredibly difficult thing to go through psychologically, but nobody knows this better than us out there. But like exercise improves your mood. You feel so much better when you exercise, and so it can have really positive effects there. And it can result in less fatigue. Like I said, with improved aerobic capacity, everything in life just is going to become a little bit easier. A flight of stairs is not going to be exercise anymore. It's just going to be a flight of stairs. That's the thing, that's true of any of our clients as we see improvement, right? Walking a mile eventually doesn't become exercise. It just, becomes a thing. I always tell people like the way I always describe this is like, here's a trap question for you guys. Do you guys think walking is easier now than when you were a baby? Survey question. Audience input. What do you guys think? Is walking harder or easier now that you're an adult?
Well, I would imagine adult.
You think it'd be easier, right?
Yeah.
But I would argue that walking is harder now than it was when you're a baby, because you weigh a lot more now than you did when you were a baby. I would argue it's much more difficult, but the difference is you are very good at it. Yeah. Nothing ever gets easier. That's one of the things that I think is really motivating about working out. Nothing gets easier. You just get better at it. that's awesome, right? Like, to me, that's like the most motivating, like positive, optimistic freaking thing. And one of the reasons why I love physical exercise so much, and also one of the reasons like I prefer to call it training, like over just like exercising. Like exercising is trying to, maintain a status quo. Training is trying to seek improvement. So we love that. We see that in our cancer patients, right? We're training them, right? Um, you know, uh, it's not going to get easier, but we can make them better at it. And that's what's great, right? That's what's going to reduce fatigue. That's what's going to reduce sort of the negative effects here. So it's very important to develop. So our priorities here, right? We're going to try to develop strength and endurance. That's going to be huge, right? Strength and endurance, which means we're going to try to aim for a little bit more high repetition, but it's going to be very difficult because of the shortness of breath. For cancer survivors, their goals honestly oftentimes include just trying to get back to prior levels of fitness, trying to get back to where they were physically before the disease took hold. And then a lot of aerobic and anaerobic exercise are huge, right? Improving their balance through bone remodeling, like, particularly weight bearing exercise there, reducing muscle weakness, reducing muscle wasting, right? All of those things. So we are trying to improve balance. We're trying to improve bone density. We're trying to improve just overall like weakness, right? So we're going to do that through a lot of the normal approaches that we would take with a hypertrophy type client. We're going to see static and active stretching is going to be recommended. We're not typically doing dynamic, mostly because dynamic tends to be a little explosive and a little bit, moves through ranges of motion that sometimes make it hard to breathe. And breathing is going to be a really, really, really difficult thing for your cancer patients. A lot of times, like shortness of breath. This is why it's actually paired up with our lung disease day, is because they're both very, very common. So you're going to start with definitely like stage 1 cardiorespiratory training. If your client is in remission, and those aerobic enzymes are no longer being destroyed, hey, progress it up to stage 2 and even try to get to stage 3, get them back to where they were, right? But make sure you do it with medical clearance. You don't want to run into a situation where your client gets nauseous or passes out or something because they can't get enough oxygen. They may have, sometimes what they'll run into is they'll have the muscle necessary to maybe produce enough effort to get up to like a really fast speed or something, but they don't have the aerobic capacity. So that can be a really negative thing that you need to keep an eye on. And then a big emphasis on core and balance training. With that muscle weakness comes a decreased ability to sort of balance and a decreased ability to sort of maintain core stabilization. And if that's the case, you definitely want to spend a lot of time, training both of those things up. A nice, healthy, stabilized core, lots and lots and lots of spinal stabilization exercises is going to be key for making sure that everything stays in place. And then also like balance, right? That neuromuscular efficiency. Now, you may not necessarily make the world's, your client may not be doing like a single leg squat, like a pistol squat, standing on a cup of water, like with medicine balls that they're spinning on 2 fingers. They don't necessarily have to get to some amazing feat of balance. But the reason we want to train balance training is because if they're experiencing muscle wasting and muscle weakness and they take a wrong step and they start to tumble, with that increased balance, they're going to be able to catch themselves much easier. And that is going to be a huge quality of life improvement. Because bruising is also a symptom. It thins out the blood vessels and makes it easier to break them. Our mode: treadmill walking, stationary cycling, rowers, low impact step aerobics. Really nothing too fancy here. This is all kind of the standardized list. But again, you'll notice we are putting like a little bit of emphasis. I personally, I really like treadmill walking. I think that walking is one of those things that we need to maintain, and sometimes it is important to train. So incline treadmill walking is one of my favorite forms of cardio for a lot of my clients. And that can be a really effective way to just keep building up their endurance. It's safe, it's very manageable. It can move with like just a couple buttons. Frequency 3 to 5 days per week, pretty standard stuff there. 3 if you're doing a little bit more intense or if your client needs more time to recover, but ideally like 5 if your client can have the endurance. Intensity, 50 to 70% of your heart rate reserve. So remember, we're using that heart rate reserve method. We're using that Karvanen formula. Take into account their resting heart rate, because their resting heart rate is going to be altered. So we want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on that. But you'll notice we're down to 50 to 70%. That's below zone 1, right? Or just into zone 1. You can go above that if they get medical clearance and if they're if they can handle it. But for the most part, this is where it's going to start. In fact, because this endurance is so limited, what we're going to see here, 15 to 30 minutes per session. That's a pretty severely reduced session time compared to what we are used to seeing. But a lot of times, that is all that a lot of your clients are going to have the energy for. If they can handle a full 60-minute session, go for it. But a lot of times it'll wipe them out for the rest of the day. And you don't want to do that. So 15 to 30 minutes is going to be big. Assessments: pushing assessment, pulling assessment, overhead squat, single leg balance. Probably not doing a full-on single leg squat. You can do SMR if it's tolerated, but be cautious of bruising. Like I said, those blood vessels tend to get a little thinned out. It tends to be a little easy to break those capillaries, a little easier to get bruised. So be cautious with that. Keep an eye on it. And then static and active stretches, depending on which is appropriate for your client, depending on their phase. Resistance training, 1 to 3 sets, about 10 to 15 repetitions. You'll notice we are, as low as 10, so we're lifting relatively heavy, but up to 15 repetitions. If we're trying to build up our client's endurance, those higher repetitions are going to be very, very, very helpful. So 10 to 15 is definitely going to be advised there. And that's about 2 to 3 days per week in terms of their overall physical activity. Special considerations: try to avoid any heavy lifting in the initial stage of training. That's true for any client, but especially true for our cancer patients. You don't lose strength linearly when you're sick. That's one of the things that's sort of a common misconception. You're not going to lose strength at the same rate all over the body. What we're going to sort of see is we are going to see a reduction, maybe more in the legs than somewhere else, because maybe those are larger muscles, right? So what happens there is, like, your client might have like the strength to do something in one part of the body and not enough strength to do something elsewhere. So if you're doing heavy lifting, which is usually reliant on compound movements, it can be risky, right? You might have glutes that can keep up and hamstrings that can't. You know what I mean? So be cautious with that. Avoid that heavy lifting. 10 to 15 repetitions is going to be much safer. And you may need to start with just 5 minutes of exercise. Like in the beginning, a lot of times, I've never really experienced all the way down to 5 minutes, but I've definitely, in like the cancer patients I've worked with, there are days where they're going to have good days and bad days. And some days they're going to have lots of energy and tons of endurance and they're going to feel great. And other days it's going to be pretty severely reduced. So be cautious with that. You may need to reduce the amount of activity for the day. You may need to call an audible, All right. Any questions on the cancer portion of this lesson? Anything you guys got? All right. Cool. Well, let's take a look at chronic lung disease. We have got chronic lung disease, right, is sort of an all-encompassing term. There's a lot of different variations of this and different versions, right? Lung cancer is obviously one. And so chronic lung disease in general, we're just going to classify that as any and all conditions that will decrease an individual's ability to bring in oxygen. Right. If your client has a decreased ability to, bring in bulk amounts of air, that is what we're going to see. And there's different versions of this, right? There's going to be restrictive lung disease, which is actually going to keep your lungs from being able to expand, or there is obstructive lung disease. Restrictive lung disease is the condition of a fibrous lung tissue, which results in decreased ability to expand your lungs. Cystic fibrosis is a good example of this. This is a fairly rare disease, but what you will see is actually there will actually be tissue that blocks the airflow. And it makes it very, 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 very difficult to breathe. Pretty severe disease here. But even like extreme obesity, with all of the excessive body weight pressing on the rib cage and pressing on the diaphragm, can restrict its ability to expand your lungs. And so that can actually be restrictive lung disease. Anytime you just don't have the ability to expand your lungs properly. Even severe, posture distortions will result in a lot of symptoms that we're going to look at here. So that's a really big one. And then there's sort of the more common version, which is obstructive lung disease. And obstructive lung disease is a condition of altered airflow through the lungs, which is generally caused by airway obstruction as the result of mucus production. So one of the things about your body is that when a foreign substance gets into it that your body can't get rid of, what it will try to do is it'll try to destroy it. For the most part, your immune system is going to, usually eat something. In fact, actually, let's take a look here. Let's see here. Footage of a virus being eaten by the immune system. So here you can see this is what happens. Okay, this is bacteria, but you can see your immune system is going to come along and just, and then it's just going to give it a beat down with a lot of enzymes that it has inside. And so, that's going to destroy everything. And then, it'll just be waste products that your body's then going to clean out. And eventually you're just going to kind of filter out through your urine and stuff. That's great when that happens, but that's not always what happens, right? That's not exactly always 100% true. So sometimes what'll happen is your body's like, I can't eat that. It doesn't have the tools to kind of destroy something. It's like, I don't know what that is. So what it does instead is it just kind of clumps some cells and surrounds the something. It just surrounds it with a group of cells. Sometimes you'll hear this. I'm actually forgetting the name. Oh, God dang it. What is it called? A bubble. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my brain's just not working. This is going to be weird. This is going to be a weird way for me to get there. Cats. Disease to human. Toxoplasmosis. Toxoplasmosis. What is that little freaking bubble called? So here's a really interesting version of that. Certain parasites, your immune system can kill them, and then they're super deactivated, but it can't get rid of them. Cyst is the word I am looking for. I cannot believe I couldn't think of that word. A bubble. Oftentimes called an oocyst. And what will happen, this is a very weird thing. Weird gross fact about cats, which, you know, my personally favorite animal, I love cats. But you want to hear something gross about them. They are all born with this one specific parasite called toxoplasmosis. Every cat, and not just like house cats, like anything that's a feline, lions, tigers, whatever. That parasite just kind of passively lives in them, you know, doesn't cause any problems or anything like that. But what will happen is it will move through it'll get into their digestive system, and then it'll make it exit into the body. And when it's exposed to oxygen, it can sometimes become airborne. And if you breathe that in, you are basically inviting this parasite into your body. So it gets into your body, and luckily toxoplasmosis, as far as parasites go, is a really wimpy one. Like it really is just one that your immune system's like, whack, you know, and just takes care of like that. But it can't actually get rid of it the same way that it gets rid of a lot of stuff. And so what it'll do is it'll just kind of put a little bubble, like a little oocyst, and it'll just kind of live in your body for the rest of your life, in this little, like, you know, little prison bubble, just like a lot of other parasites that you've probably, you know, unknowingly eaten plenty of times throughout your life. Plastics and artificial sweeteners and all these things, you know, if your body can't get rid of it, if it cannot filter it out through, you know, the liver or the kidneys, you know, and it can't either destroy it or get it out of your body, then it'll just put it in a little bubble, and just store it somewhere, usually in fat tissue. Like I said, you know, if it's a chemical, that's where it has the possibility of maybe stealing electrons from somewhere. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But, you know, if it's a parasite, maybe it'll do that. But this is what your body does. Your body basically just is kind of like a kid throwing a blanket over stuff instead of cleaning the room. It's like, yeah, it looks clean, you know, like you don't see the clutter, right? Or shoving something in the closet rather than cleaning it, right? Like that's not shoving something under the bed, you know, like it's not actually like, you know, taking care of anything. It's just kind of get out of sight, out of mind, right? So if you bring stuff into your lungs, cigarettes are the classic example of this. What will happen is your body will create mucus in order to basically cover all of this not food, not human stuff, right? And so we see what we call it tar a lot of times, but that's really just like a descriptive name that kind of describes this stuff that is inside of your lungs, you know. And make no mistake, guys, like this is happening with vaping as well, and it's also happening with you know, like cannabis and stuff. You know, that's still like smoking stuff. Just it shouldn't happen. It's just you do not want to put small particles in your lungs. It's just not a very good idea. There's really no you know, positives to putting stuff in your lungs. Now you could argue that's like, well, if you look at like certain types of like cannabis and stuff, they have really positive effects on human cells sometimes. You know, it can fight depression, it can fight you know, pain. There is like definitely like benefits to, you know, THC and stuff like that. But like there's just other ways to get it into your body. Like smoking is just never going to be good for us. Like, you know, I love camping, but like smoking, being around smoke in a campfire is not awesome. Like, I love the way it makes my clothes smell. Yeah, I love coming home from a camping trip and being like, I smell like camping. You know, like, I love that. You know, not good for us. Just putting particles in your lungs because they can't get out. So what happens is your body develops mucus. It just kind of covers it up with this sticky fluid, and then that starts to restrict your airflow. You know, when you look inside of your lungs, you know, you've got all these little bronchioles, these little like branches and tubes and stuff, right? And then what can happen is we can see obstructive lung disease looks like this. There's sort of two different versions here, right? You can see like here's the inflammation that can come along with it, and that's another version that your body does, where just put fluid around something and make it swell up and be inflamed, right? Or maybe it'll be stuff. I mean, you can see like there's goo inside of here, right? There's literally like tar buildup. So what starts to happen is when you look at your alveoli at the end of all these, at the end of all of these like little bronchial branches, you've got these alveoli, these little popcorn style sacs, right? That's where oxygen's actually going to diffuse. This is what's covered in blood vessels, right? This is where your blood is becoming exposed to the outside world. But if you have so much pressure here, because like maybe this one's covered and this one's covered, so now all these guys have to take the amount of air force that's coming in here, it can literally break down these walls and it can damage it. Now you have less surface area, right? Like there's no wall here, so there's no surface area for those blood vessels to cover, which means less oxygen can diffuse into the body. This is extremely bad for us. So definitely something we want to avoid at all costs. Asthma is actually an example of this. Asthma is a little bit more of an inflammatory disease of those bronchioles. Emphysema is, stuff covering them. But even things like chronic bronchitis, that is material obstructing your lungs. My mom was a smoker for years. Actually, here's a fun story for you guys. My mom hid her smoking from my dad and I, actually. I don't know how she hid it from my dad, because you can smell a cigarette from a mile away, I feel like. But then again, the Thompsons have never been known for our ability to smell. Probably why we owned a pet store. But man, I remember one day, I was like, I think I was 4 years old, and I like walked around the house. Like I was just like walking outside, and I came around the corner and my mom was smoking a cigarette. And in my brain, like my little kid brain, I remembered, like, this is in the 90s, right? When they used to have all those commercials where it's like, this is your brain on drugs. And like, here's like a smoking, and here's what smoking does to your lungs, and like smoking kills. The 90s was intense in terms of like commercials. And I remember just like all those, I remember this like night and day. Just flooded into my brain, like all these like things about how smoking kills. And I just was like, I stared at her for a second, and then I just started bawling, like, because I was like, she's gonna go, like, she's gonna be in the commercials. It was awful, traumatized. But she smoked for years. That wasn't enough to get her to quit. She didn't quit until I was 18. So years and years and years of smoking, and it's done permanent damage to her lungs. One of the reasons my parents actually got rid of the pet store is because at one point, unfortunately, the place we were renting it from didn't take very good care of the building, and so it got black mold in between, like behind this one wall from another shop that we were connected to. And so my mom was like, and she had to go to the hospital, and they were like, you have mold in your lungs, and like, you're a smoker, and like those two things combined are giving, you're gonna have lung disease for the rest of your life. And so she coughs a lot. She's got like, you can hear it when she coughs. Her chest basically rattles. You can kind of hear it in the back of her throat and stuff. And so that's pretty intense. Like she's got, we call that emphysema, right? And chronic bronchitis. She'll catch bronchitis multiple times per year. Her lungs will just fill with fluid and stuff. And it sucks. It leads to shortness of breath. It reduces her energy. It has really, really negative effects on her overall life. She has shortness of breath problems, which, leads to her not doing cardio, which is probably what led to her heart attack as well. So our considerations here, right? Like, what are we going to experience with this stuff? Well, like I said, lung disease very frequently associated with cardiovascular disease. Unfortunately, these two often go hand in hand. With restrictive lung capacity, your clients will often sort of settle into a more sedentary lifestyle. And with that sedentary lifestyle, we know that we're not burning as much energy. And then there's a lack of energy balance, which means that excessive body weight becomes an issue, and cardiovascular disease. Eventually, like, the heart weakens. Again, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? That's true with muscle. It's true with bone. It's true for everything in your body. We also know that upper extremity exercise in particular can often lead to shortness of breath. We call that dyspnea, if you want the medical term for shortness of breath. But a lot of times doing upper body exercises, because that kind of restricts how the rib cage can move, can often result in shortness of breath in your clients. So I definitely, one of the things we're going to look at today, we got to be cautious if you're doing things like push-ups, because that can make it very difficult for your client to breathe. Anything, or even like just high planks or low planks, things where you are basically like locking your upper body into one position where it's difficult to breathe diaphragmatically. That can be pretty restrictive for your clients with lung disease. So be cautious with that. A lot of times they will sometimes use supplemental oxygen. Luckily, my mom's is not that severe. But this is definitely something we'll see sometimes. And your clients may experience significant muscle wasting and body weight. You got to remember, like, oxygen is what keeps your muscles alive, right? So if you are not supplying your muscles with regular oxygen, it's very difficult for them to grow. And sometimes it's difficult for them to simply maintain themselves. So your body will go, all right, well, we're going to get rid of some of this muscle tissue. That is a decrease in your muscle fiber size. We call that sarcopenia, which is a very common term that you guys will see. Sarcopenia is the general law. Sarcopenia is something we all experience as we get older. Like becoming a senior, part of that is developing sarcopenia. Your muscle fibers are just going to shift from being type 2, where they're really big, to type 1, where they're a little, thinner in size, right? But their decreased function is what we're worried about, right? And that can sometimes happen, especially with lung disease, right? So negative effects, obviously a decreased gas exchange ability, because this mucus is blocking those airways and you're just simply covering up, this exposure. Your blood doesn't get exposed to like oxygen, right? That's going to decrease how much oxygen gets into the body. That's going to decrease your ventilation as well. Remember, there's a difference here between like ventilation, which is bringing air in, and the oxygen exchanging that's happening. One is due to pressure, and one is due to bulk flow, right? So, the shortness of breath, the uncomfortable nature. I mean, I know, we've been wearing masks for a freaking year now. When you're wearing a mask and it just feels a little claustrophobic, it's a little difficult to breathe, that's a restrictive problem. You are affecting ventilation, but luckily we ventilate way more molecules of oxygen than we can actually diffuse anyways. So you're not actually reducing how much oxygen is getting into your bloodstream when you're wearing a mask. It just feels very uncomfortable. So both of those things can be true. You will have the decreased oxygen ability, which means you can bring in a bunch of oxygen, but if it can't get into your bloodstream, guess what? You're not actually breathing that air. Or you'll have decreased ventilation. So alterations in posture make it much more difficult for your clients to bring in just massive amounts of gas. It will often result in low levels of exercise. Again, energy levels are going to be a lot lower. Shortness of breath is going to be very, very common. Obviously, I mean, that's this is honestly what this disease is, right? Those shallow breathing patterns lead to shortness of breath, which can lead to hypocapnia. It can lead to tension headaches. It can lead to a lot of negative effects. But again, silver lining or positive stuff that we can talk about, like let's on the optimistic side, exercise can improve all of these functional capabilities. You can make your blood cells better at diffusing oxygen. So maybe oxygen doesn't have as much access to your blood, but at least your blood's better at pulling that oxygen out. Great. Okay, cool. There we go. Exercise did that, right? You can increase that, and then there's just the psychological benefits. You'll see an improved functional capacity. Your client may develop an increased tolerance for the uncomfortable nature of exercise, like that shortness of breath feeling. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about here. This is we'll get into like it's the David Goggins part of today's lesson. Like that guy's a crazy person, like he's an inspirational, maniac. And he's all about like mind over matter, he believes in how much effort you can kind of put into simply like, believing in so, and the effects that you can have just of believing that you can do something, that's incredible. And it's great. There are definitely positive psychological benefits to exercise. There is sort of a mind over matter, thing that's going to happen here. Obviously a decrease in the shortness of breath, like just overall symptoms, which is big. We're going to see that being very, very common. We are also going to see psychological benefits as well as physiologic benefits. So we'll see increased positivity. But one of the biggest things, and this is one of my favorite things to talk about, but I'm not going to talk too much about it today because we've got a lesson for it coming up soon. That is one of my favorite freaking things to talk about. But exercise can increase your client's locus of control, and it can give them an internal locus of control. And I know that seems really weird, like the word locus, right? But it's the belief, what an internal locus of control is, it's the belief that you are in control of your life, not external forces. One of the things that kind of sucks about feeling like shortness of breath, and I'm sure everybody knows what I'm talking about. That really anxious, negative, terrible feeling you get when you have a cold and you have a runny nose and like this nostril gets like clogged up so you can only breathe through this side. You're just like, oh God, I hate that I'm breathing through. And then all of a sudden this one gets clogged up too. And you're trying to breathe through your nose. You're like, I can't. You just got to breathe through your mouth. And you're like, this sucks. And I'm uncomfortable and I'm mad. I'm frustrated, right? I just want to breathe. The reason that you get so flustered and frustrated by stuff like that is because you're not in control of something you should be in control of. Like everybody is a control freak, like an internal locus of control is the belief that you're in control of things, not external forces, right? The belief that like what you choose to do matters and what you choose to do is going to have a positive effect. Exercising for a client who, has shortness of breath, who feels like they're just like trapped in their own body, who cannot move because they just simply get exhausted or get completely out of breath, building up a tolerance for that and helping them develop that and making that go away is some of the absolute most rewarding, like really beneficial stuff in the realm of exercise. It's awesome to just feel like I've definitely talked to clients that I've worked with before. And you get a million, I'm sure you guys have heard versions of this story tens of thousands of times, like throughout your lifetime at some point, but maybe it hasn't really like landed or made like a big effect if you've never really taken the time to like think about it. But when you talk about a client who just feels a little bit stronger and they're like, you know what, like I was able to lift this and I was able to do this and like get this thing here. And I didn't think I was going to be able to do that. That's awesome. And I feel great right now. I feel like a friggin' warrior, even just like the small weird things. I mean, I think everybody in here probably knows what I'm talking about, but I do sometimes feel like this is a guy thing more than anything. Andres, Isaiah, if you guys are with me on this, you feel really accomplished when you can bring all your groceries in one load. I always tell people, I'd rather break both my arms off than take 2 trips for groceries. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Lose circulation.
Yeah, right. Like, yeah, I'd rather my fingers turn purple and lose a finger than take 2 loads. That's sort of that feeling of accomplishment, that feeling of internal control that you have. Giving your clients that back who felt like they've lost that due to like, almost being prisoners in their own body because they don't have the ability to breathe and they get exhausted quickly. Building up that tolerance is incredible. It's an incredible journey for these people. So I love talking about it. It's, I can't tell you how many times I've had obese clients who had, experienced shortness of breath, who've lost a lot of weight, who can, get up a mountain that they didn't think they could, when they didn't think they could walk to the end of their driveway. It's some of the best parts of this job. Now, one of the special considerations, we really only see one big thing here. This is an interesting one, is peripheral heart action circuits are recommended for our clients. Now, here's the thing. Remember, peripheral heart action is going upper body, lower body, upper body, lower body, upper body, lower body, right? That was really good for blood pressure because that's evenly distributing blood up and down. It's like constrict, dilate, right? You're just going back and forth. Why the heck does that have a positive effect on the lungs? It actually doesn't. We're not doing it for any physiologic benefit, but peripheral heart action is actually really, really, really important for your clients who experience shortness of breath because it allows their upper body a little bit of a break while their lower body is working. So while they're doing something like, let's say, a body weight squat, they're able to expand their rib cage normally because their arms are not locked in some type of like specific position. They shouldn't be locked like this anyways, but they're not going to lock their upper body into any one particular like joint position, which is not going to restrict their lungs, which is going to give them time to breathe a little bit better. So that is actually why we do peripheral heart action with our clients who have lung disease. And I know like some don't, it's not related to blood flow, although don't forget peripheral heart action will train your blood vessels, which is just great in general. But this is one of the reasons why when I'm doing circuit training, I pretty much always do peripheral heart action. Unless I'm going from like, if I want to do like vertical loading where I go like upper body down to lower body, where basically you start with smaller stuff and then work your way up. Okay, sure. Then I'll kind of keep it in the area and then head it down. That has been shown to be a little bit better for hypertrophy purposes. But if my goal is to make an athlete, I'm going up and down. So mode, we like ellipticals, treadmills, steppers. You'll notice that we don't have the rowing machine up here on this one. That's definitely something that's going to make shortness of breath an issue. So we definitely prefer things where the body can kind of be upright and the rib cage can be open. 3 to 5 days per week, pretty standard stuff there. You will notice, what's up, bird? You'll notice that we're going to do 40 to 60% of your peak work capacity. So we're not saying VO2 max, we're not saying heart rate reserve, because their heart might be strong, but their lungs might not be able to keep up. So what you're going to do is you're going to establish work capacity ranges. Get your client on a treadmill and tell them, hey, this first session is going to be really uncomfortable. I want to get you to a place of discomfort. And then gauge where they're at. Put them on a treadmill, put them on a stationary cycle, put them on a step or whatever, right? Start them on low and then amp it up and make it harder and harder and harder and harder until eventually it's like, where are you tapping out? And that's like, I'm tapping out at, let's say 6 miles per hour at a 2 incline. It's like, okay, that's where that's your max, right? And exercise sort of started around like 4 miles per hour at a 0 incline. So we're going to work between those, right? I want you to do, 2 minutes at like that 4 mile per hour, right? And then I want you to amp it up and go, 30 seconds at 5.5 miles per hour. So we're not at the peak, but we're definitely getting out of breath, and then recover for another 2 minutes. Like you're going to establish your work capacity, 40 to 60% max effort. Don't go over. In that example, I was actually probably a little too close to the peak. Don't go over 60% of their peak effort. To use really simple numbers, and none of your clients will ever be this mathematically simple, but if you think of that as like maybe their peak is 10.0 on the treadmill, you're not going to take them above a 6. Duration, work up to 24 to 45 minutes. If you can handle a full 60, go for it. But most people they're going to be completely out of breath multiple times in that 20 minutes. So that 20 minutes of activity will even be maybe only closer to 15. Pushing assessment and pulling assessment, be cautious with those because that is going to cause shortness of breath. The overhead squat's fine, single leg squat, single leg balance. This isn't musculoskeletal, so all of these are really good. Flexibility, we like static, active, and SMR. Again, we're avoiding dynamic here simply because we're not doing a lot of power stuff, and we're not moving the body into those specific ranges of motion. Resistance training, you'll see we generally have time for about one set of about 8 to 15 repetitions. That is way lower than we normally see. Normally we see multiple sets of exercises. And if you can do that, go for it. But a lot of times your clients will not have the endurance to do it. So better to hit everything and, sort of lay it out to where they kind of address the whole body, maybe multiple times in the week, rather than just trying to get it all done in one session where you're hitting multiple sets. A one set routine actually can be very effective here. Special considerations, like I said, upper body can cause dyspnea. It can cause that shortness of breath, so be careful. It should say down here, peripheral heart action should be used. But that kind of is part of this allowing for sufficient rest. Make sure you're giving your client rest between sets. That's going to be really, really important. And make sure that you are alternating upper and lower, because that's going to give them a little bit of rest in that body part while you're training something else. We call it active rest, right? Any questions on restrictive lung disease, guys? I'm sorry, not restrictive lung disease, but just obstructive lung disease, or restrictive, either. Chronic lung disease.
It's good.
All right. Well, let's take a look at our SOAP note example, which I have in this folder. All right. So here's a client who is, in remission, trying to get back to her health after going through cancer treatment. So this is our client, Tatiana. She was dealing with breast cancer, but it's in remission. I remember this. I actually remember the day we built this person. So her hobbies used to include playing tennis, painting, and she really liked pole dancing. This is the previous class loved building this per client. Which means that definitely getting the body into very funky positions where obstructing upper body, a lot of freaking upper body strength when it comes to pole dancing. It is some of the most incredible upper body strength movements that you can freaking do out there. And so shortness of breath is definitely something we are going to put a lot of emphasis on for already. We got down to here and I can already picture how this workout's going to go. Her occupation, she's a rocket scientist. So which is a pretty sedentary job. She's working on a computer, 4 to 6 hours per day. Her goal is to increase her energy throughout the day and get her upper body strength back so she can get back to dancing. And she also wants to develop that cardio for tennis. She's 37 years old. She only weighs 145 pounds. So we're not dealing with obesity or anything like that. She's 5'8". These are all very, she's in a very normal weight category, but her strength is just reduced. Her cardiorespiratory endurance is just reduced, right? Unfortunately, the treatment for these things just, damaged all this. So we're going to do the overhead squat, right? Well, we noticed that we're going to do the overhead squat. We're going to do the pushing and the pulling. And we're going to do the Rockport walk test so that we can test her VO2 max. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to complete that full mile walk without getting out of breath. So unfortunately, that wasn't where we weren't able to quite get that. But in the future, that's something we are going to work up to. Her overhead squat, we noticed that she has an arms falling forward situation. That makes sense. She got a desk job. During her pushing and pulling, we saw the shoulders elevate. That makes sense. She's got a desk job. And then we also know she's got an anterior pelvic tilt. So she has this excessive low back arch that's going on. So we're going to look at tight hip flexors. That makes sense. She's sitting 4 to 6 hours per day. So Rockport walk test is going to be a big one. We're also going to look for the max push-up test. We're going to see, like, let's see if we can develop that upper body strength, right? Actually, that should be up here on objective information. I'm going to modify this in the real time. Max push-ups. We're going to say she can do 13, right? So we're, yeah, we're going to say she can do 13, right? So we're trying to get that much higher, right? Especially to deal with friggin' pole dancing. Man, pole dancing is a friggin' fun one to work on with your clients because it involves like learning about body weights and calisthenics, but it is a difficult progression. So one of the other assessments we got, this is kind of a fun one. We're going to do a dead hang assessment. So she's going to hang from a pull-up bar for maximal time. That should also be up here. Why didn't I put that in? Dead hang assessment. Let's say she can do that for 35 seconds. So that's pretty good, right? We want to work that maybe up to see if she can sort of dead hang for a full minute uninterrupted, right? That would be a pretty substantial improvement. And once that happens, like we're seeing that improvement in grip, great. We can work on, some of the other versions and stuff. So for her cardio, we want to work our way up to 30 minutes on the treadmill about 3 times per week if she can. We're going to be 50 to 70% of her heart rate reserve. So she should be able to hold a conversation the entire time. We're not getting to a place when, we're working up to that 30 minutes. She could not walk the mile on the Rockport walk test without, needing a break, but she just didn't have the endurance yet, So that was probably going to take anywhere from, 15 to 17 minutes, probably at a pace that a client like this was probably moving. So clearly a full 15 minutes uninterrupted is not an option right now. But if we can break it into 10-minute, intervals, that is a great way for her to build her endurance. We maybe start with 10 minutes. In 2 weeks, we move up to 12 minutes, right? 14, 16, boom. And eventually we got a full 30 minutes going. For her flexibility training, we're putting a lot of emphasis on the lats, the pecs, and the upper traps. That's going to address those arms falling forward. And then we're going to look a lot at the hip flexors and the TFL, which is going to address that anterior pelvic tilt. For her strength training, we're going to do 2 times per week, anywhere from 1 to 3 sets, 10 to 15 repetitions at a slow tempo. This is going to be especially important for the pole dancing, right? Because we want to be able to that's an isometric friggin' hold, right? We need endurance to be able to do that. We're going to focus on stabilization exercises. We're going to do a lot of TRX and calisthenics, that's all body weight stuff, similar to the sport, right? And we're going to focus on frontal plane movements for playing tennis. We're going to work a lot on how to move, laterally. Lateral side shuffles, X-band walks, things like that are all going to be really, really helpful for that lateral tennis movement. And the suspension upper body stuff is going to be really helpful for the pole dancing, right? Special instructions, always avoid heavy lifting. We don't want to get into that just yet. Have a chair available in case they get exhausted. Make sure that they have a place to sit down anytime they need to. We don't want to get our client, if they need to take 5 minutes out of the session to just relax and sort of calm down before starting everything back up between sets, fine. That's what this is going to be, right? We're booked for an hour, So that is that I forgot about this client. That is sort of a very realistic look at what it is to kind of work with a client who's sort of in cancer remission. Any questions on that one, guys? Any questions at all today in terms of where we're headed? Doesn't seem like it. All right, you three. So tomorrow we're going to be meeting up in person. We'll be at Sochi tomorrow. We'll do a morning session at 9. We'll do an evening session at 6. I'm gonna probably, we'll be all right. I hope we have really, really good numbers tomorrow. I really encourage those of you who, actually all 3 of you guys are usually there every time. but anybody like watching the recording or whatever, I definitely encourage coming to this one. This one's gonna be really fun. We're gonna pair up and we're gonna do some actual like student to student training. So you guys will be able to kind of write your own workouts and stuff. We're gonna create like some soap notes, and then we're gonna pair that with an OPT. I'm gonna be there to help, but you'll have like some specific rules to follow, which will be really fun. And it'll be like, oh, I want to do this, and it's like, oh, but that's in the way of that, and I can't. Those two don't go together. So it'll be a really good time. It'll really be the most sort of real world example we've had in quite some time to what this job is. So very exciting stuff. And that's what we got planned for tomorrow. So I will see you guys then.